Power has a way of blinding people long before it teaches them to see. In a room filled with crystal chandeliers, tailored suits, and unspoken rules of privilege, no one noticed the quiet cruelty unfolding in the corner. No one except a black waitress whose job was to stay invisible. When a disabled boy stood frozen at the edge of a polished dance floor, mocked by silence and ignored by wealth, his father believed the world had already decided his son's limits. What happened next was never meant to happen. A single step, offered without pity or permission, shifted more than a dance. It cracked open a belief system built on money, power, and racial hierarchy. By the end of that night, a billionaire's empire would mean nothing compared to what he was forced to confront inside himself. Backhand index pointing right before the story continues. Support Black Voice Stories by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Your support helps these powerful stories reach the world. The city skyline glittered like a promise reserved for those who already had everything. Towering glass buildings reflected success, ambition, and a quiet separation between those who belonged and those who served. At the center of this world stood Marcus Halden, a self-made billionaire whose name carried weight in boardrooms, political circles, and charity galas. His wealth was celebrated as proof of merit, intelligence, and relentless discipline. Yet behind the headlines and honors, Marcus lived with a private frustration he never allowed to surface in public. His son, Ethan Halden, had been born with a neurological condition that limited his motor coordination. Doctors spoke carefully, offering measured optimism while outlining boundaries that Marcus found impossible to accept. To him, limitation felt like failure, and failure was something he had spent his entire life outrunning. Ethan received the best therapists, the finest schools, and every technological advantage money could buy. Still, no amount of wealth could rewrite the way society looked at his son. Public events were the hardest. Marcus believed visibility would strengthen Ethan, but instead it exposed him. Subtle glances lingered too long. Smiles stiffened with discomfort. People praised Marcus for his devotion, while silently lowering their expectations for Ethan. Marcus noticed everything but addressed nothing, convincing himself that endurance was strength. The gala that night was meant to be a victory lap. A fundraiser hosted in Marcus's honor celebrated his philanthropic work, including donations toward accessibility programs. The irony went unnoticed by most. The ballroom buzzed with quiet conversations and restrained laughter, the kind that floated above polished floors without ever touching them. Ethan stood beside his father, dressed carefully, posture rigid, hands slightly trembling. Music drifted through the room as couples moved effortlessly across the dance floor. Ethan watched with a mixture of fascination and fear. His body wanted to follow rhythms it struggled to obey. Along the edges of the room moved the service staff, nearly all people of color, trained to blend into the background. Among them was Lena Brooks, a black waitress whose life existed far from the marble hallways of wealth. She worked double shifts to support her mother and younger brother, navigating a world where kindness was rarely extended without conditions. Lena had learned to observe quietly. Years in service taught her how privilege moved, how discomfort traveled, and how quickly humanity disappeared when status entered the room. She noticed Ethan immediately, not because of his condition, but because of the loneliness that radiated from him. It was a loneliness she recognized, shaped differently, but rooted in the same exclusion. Marcus barely noticed Lena. To him, she was part of the infrastructure, no more remarkable than the silver trays she carried. He was too consumed by how others perceived his son, by the tension between pride and embarrassment he refused to name. As the night unfolded, the distance between Ethan and the dance floor grew heavier. Every song deepened the divide between what the room celebrated and what it quietly rejected. Marcus told himself the event was a success, unaware that the moment that would define his life was approaching silently from the margins. The music shifted into a slower rhythm, inviting vulnerability rather than spectacle. The dance floor cleared slightly, leaving space for possibility. Ethan's eyes followed the movement instinctively, his feet shifting in small, uncertain motions. His body remembered rhythms his mind struggled to coordinate. Marcus noticed the movement and felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture meant to steady, but one that often communicated caution. Years of protecting his son had quietly become years of restricting him. Across the room, Lena watched the exchange. She had seen this kind of protection before, the kind that masqueraded as care while reinforcing fear. Something in Ethan's posture spoke louder than words ever could. He wasn't asking for help. He was asking for permission. Protocol demanded Lena stay where she was. Service staff did not interrupt guests. They certainly did not approach Billionaire's children. The rules were clear, and breaking them carried consequences. But Lena had learned that injustice often survived because rules were followed too well. She moved closer under the pretense of clearing glasses, positioning herself within Ethan's line of sight. She offered no grand gesture, no dramatic intervention. She simply slowed her steps to the rhythm of the music, letting her movements be visible but unassuming. Ethan noticed. His body mirrored hers unconsciously, a subtle shift that caught Lena's attention. She adjusted her pace, exaggerating nothing, allowing him to lead without pressure. Each movement became an invitation, rather than an instruction. The room continued its conversations, unaware that something extraordinary was happening. Ethan stepped forward, tentative but determined. His movements were uneven, but they were his. Lena followed his rhythm, honoring it without correction. Marcus froze. His first instinct was alarm, followed quickly by indignation. A waitress had crossed a line. A black woman had inserted herself into his carefully managed world. His power surged reflexively, ready to restore order. But something stopped him. He saw his son smiling. Not the polite smile Ethan used to reassure adults, but a genuine expression of joy that reached his eyes. The tension in Ethan's body softened, replaced by focus and pride. For the first time that night, Ethan was not being watched. He was being seen. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Some guests observed with curiosity, others with discomfort. The image disrupted the hierarchy of the room. A black waitress, following the lead of a disabled white boy, challenged assumptions no one wanted to examine. Security shifted uneasily. Managers hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. Marcus stood immobilized by a conflict he had avoided his entire life. The conflict between control and trust. Lena remained focused on Ethan, attuned to his pace, responding to his cues. She allowed mistakes without correction, creating space where failure carried no shame. In doing so, she offered something Marcus never had: unconditional respect. The music ended quietly. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then growing. Ethan stood taller, breathing deeply, his confidence radiant. Lena stepped back immediately, returning to her role as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But everything had changed. Marcus felt something unfamiliar rising within him. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. In his pursuit of excellence, he had overlooked dignity. In his desire to protect, he had constrained. The rest of the evening unfolded in a blur. Conversations felt hollow. Praise rang empty. Marcus could not unsee what he had witnessed. The boundaries he had enforced so strictly suddenly felt arbitrary and cruel. Lena continued her shift, aware of the eyes on her, bracing for consequences. Experience taught her that moments of humanity often carried a price. Yet she felt no regret. She had responded to a need, not a title. As the gala ended, Marcus sought answers within himself, haunted by a truth he could no longer deny. His wealth had built walls, not bridges, and it had taken someone society deemed insignificant to show him where those walls stood. The following days unraveled Marcus's carefully constructed certainty. Meetings felt performative. Decisions lacked weight. His thoughts returned repeatedly to that moment on the dance floor, replaying it with painful clarity. For the first time, Marcus examined his own biases, not as abstract concepts, but as lived behaviors. He had believed himself progressive, generous, enlightened, yet he had unconsciously ranked humanity, placing himself at the center and others at the margins. Ethan changed too. His posture grew more confident. His willingness to try expanded beyond therapy rooms and controlled environments. The dance had unlocked something that years of professional intervention had not: self-belief. Marcus watched his son closely, grappling with guilt. He realized his fear of public judgment had been projected onto Ethan, shaping limitations that never belonged to him. The reckoning intensified when Marcus learned that Lena had been reprimanded for her actions. The system responded predictably, framing her kindness as misconduct. The injustice landed with force. This was the breaking point. Marcus confronted the mechanisms he had benefited from his entire life. He saw how easily power excused cruelty and punished compassion. For the first time, silence felt like complicity. He made a decision that shocked those around him. Not a donation, not a statement, but structural change. He redirected resources, restructured leadership, and demanded accountability within his own organization. More importantly, he sought to listen, not to defend, not to explain, to listen. Lena's life intersected with Marcus's again under different circumstances. This time, she was not invisible. This time, she was acknowledged as a catalyst she had been all along. The confrontation between Marcus's past and present selves reached its peak as he addressed his peers, challenging the narratives that had protected them for generations. The cost was immediate. Influence wavered. Alliances fractured. Comfort evaporated. But clarity replaced it. Marcus understood now that transformation required sacrifice. It demanded the surrender of privilege, not its rebranding. And it required centering voices that had been silenced, not speaking for them. The climax was not loud. It was resolute. It was a billionaire choosing humility over dominance, accountability over image. Ethan stood beside him through it all, embodying the very courage Marcus had underestimated. The boy who once feared judgment now navigated the world with open curiosity, unburdened by expectations that were never his to carry. The dance had ended long ago, but its impact echoed through every decision that followed. Change unfolded unevenly, as it always does. Some praised Marcus's evolution, framing it as redemption. Others dismissed it as performative. Marcus learned to accept both without centering himself. What mattered was consistency. Policies shifted. Opportunities expanded. Voices long excluded found platforms that did not require assimilation. Marcus ensured that Lena's act of humanity was honored, not exploited. Lena continued her life with renewed agency, not because a billionaire validated her worth, but because she had never doubted herself. The experience affirmed what she had always known. Dignity does not require permission. Ethan grew into himself, embracing challenges without internalized shame. He learned that leadership was not about perfection, but presence. That night had taught him something invaluable, that being followed was not a privilege reserved for the able-bodied or powerful. Marcus's legacy transformed quietly, not through monuments or accolades, but through systems that outlived him. He learned that real change did not announce itself. It embedded itself. The story spread not as a fairy tale, but as a reminder that justice often begins with small, courageous acts, that racism and ableism thrive in silence, not ignorance, and that sometimes the most profound lessons arrive uninvited, carried by those society teaches us to overlook. The dance became a symbol, not of charity, but of equality, not of rescue, but of respect. And long after the music faded, its lesson remained. Backhand index point right if the story moved you. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Stories. Your engagement helps amplify stories that challenge injustice and inspire change.